I shall see. And I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. There'll be no sorrow there, no more burdens to bear, no more sickness, no pain, no more parting over there. And forever I will be with the one who died for me. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be, when my Jesus I shall see. And I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. Thank you. You may be seated.
Well, in one of my recent opportunities to be up here on a Wednesday night, I said that normally when Pastor asks me to fill in, he gives me plenty of notice. And yesterday I got about 26 hours of notice. And so I was driving home from work. I went ahead after he texted and worked a full day, and I was driving home from work, and I thought, okay, Lord, in about 26 hours, I got to stand before your people and bring them something. You got to do something here, because if it's up to me, they're going to run me out of that place. And he said, I can do that. So I got home, and I started typing, and the words started to flow now. I finished putting this material together, and it's 7, 8, 9 pages, something like that. And I thought, wow, we're going to be there late. This is going to be a Ruley message. So this morning I used it in order to familiarize myself with it, to be a little more prepared. I used it as my morning devotion this morning, and I timed it. I read it verbatim, word for word. Who wants to guess how long it was? 12 minutes. So today I knocked off 2 hours early because I was cold, and I wanted to work on this some more. And I went home and I worked on it some more, and I felt really good about it, and I read it again, and who wants to guess how long it was? 15 minutes. So if this takes me, and in a lot of ways I feel like I'm hearing it for the first time too, because it was just written last night. If this takes me 15 minutes, that'll be 7:30. And that means you guys are going to talk. So be thinking right now, there's a good chance I'm going to offer you this microphone for testimonies. I know Sunday night after communion, Fred C. passed the microphone around, and I always enjoy hearing from you guys too. So if you might have something on your heart, we'd love to hear it. So be thinking now about that. So I'm going to try not to read this to you word for word. I'll try to make some eye contact, but hopefully God can use this and we'll get a blessing. At a previous church that my family and I used to attend before we came here, a church in Mishawaka, there was a widow lady who began attending that church after we had been there a number of years. And I was on the deacon board at that time, and that church's policy was anybody who started attending there who expressed an interest in membership was to meet with the entire deacon board just so the board could interview that person, ask any questions that they thought were pertinent relative to spirituality. Are you saved? How long have you been saved? Have you been baptized? And so I remember being in this meeting with this lady. Now, I was in my early 30s. I'm 47 now. This was probably 15 years ago. And by far, I was the youngest deacon on that board. And that in itself can cause some intimidation, being around these older, much more godly than myself men. But anyway, I was struck by this lady. She was probably 65 maybe back then. And I knew she was a widow. That was all I knew. I knew her name. She'd been coming for a few months. But I was struck by her godliness, by her spiritual maturity. And everything she said, and she wasn't a loud or even outspoken person, but when she spoke, it was wisdom. And I just thought, man, I need to, when people like that who have been saved a long, long time talk, I need to listen. Maybe I can learn something from these people. And we have people like that in this church. I'm not going to call out names because I don't want to embarrass people or miss somebody, but you know who they are. This lady was very humble, and she has since passed, but if she were still alive, she would be embarrassed for me to be up here talking about her this way. My family ended up becoming dear friends with this lady, to the point that she watched our daughters when my wife and I went to Brazil on a 10-day mission trip. Do you remember how old the girls were?
I think 5 and 8.
5 years old and 8 years old, and they're now 16 and 19, and almost 17 and 19. And I don't think I will ever forget this lady babysitting for us, because I don't remember if we found out in Brazil by email or after we got home, but while we were away and this lady was watching our girls, she had to spank Abigail, our youngest. And it was because she got up in the morning and made them breakfast, and I think it was eggs. Abby wouldn't eat the eggs, and this lady meant business. And she said, "Young lady, you eat those eggs." And she told Abby a number of times, "You need to eat those eggs." And Abby just ignored her and would not eat the eggs. And I bet she said it a dozen times. And now we only have to say things like that about 10 times. So Abby's getting better. But anyway, to hear Becca tell it, and Becca was traumatized because she still talks about this. She finally yanked Abby up and hauled her off to a different room, and Becca heard swat, 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 and heard Abby wailing. And did she ever eat the eggs? Who knows? Probably not. But if this lady was still alive, I'd ask her to spank Abby again, because it was more effective when she did it than when we ever did it. But anyway, she was in our home for meals multiple times. We were in her home for meals multiple times. Mr. Westfall probably knows who I'm talking about. And I always came away from time spent with this lady thinking, do I just need to get older to be as godly as she is? And I thought, well, maybe that's it. She's a lot older. She's been through some things. She's been saved a lot longer. She was a hard worker. The church would do work days, a couple work days a year, and it was projects that had piled up at the church. Volunteers from within the church body would come in and tackle these lists, and these were long, long days. It was a Saturday from sun up to sundown, inside and out. And she was one of the first to arrive, one of the last to leave. And she always wore a skirt. She'd be painting, sanding, scrubbing, cleaning, the nastiest, dirtiest thing that hadn't been cleaned in 60 years. She's cleaning it wearing a skirt. So that was another thing that always stuck with me. The church put her to work in ministry as soon as she became a member. And that was something she insisted on. And I remember in that deacon meeting where she met with the board, she said, okay, if this is approved, I want to go to work now, because we're supposed to be working. So they put her to work immediately, and it was mostly with children, but as long as she had been saved and been in church, I know she had worked with every age group. She was serious about the Lord. She believed that He always deserved our best. And I could just never shake this thought that she has a secret that's led her to be this role model that I was kind of in awe of. And I just never knew what the secret was. Well, by God's grace, now I know what the secret was. And we'll talk about how that secret was revealed to me a little later. She never struck me as being a sad person, even though I knew she was a widow. I didn't know how recently she had been widowed, but I knew she was a widow. It did seem that certain things would bring her to tears easily. I remember she would cry at the smallest gesture that somebody in that church would do for her, to be a blessing to her. And when I would see that, we would take her food sometimes that we had left over, and you could tell she was trying to hold it in, but the chin would tremble, and that was gratitude. And again, I would look at that. I'm in my early 30s, and it didn't strike me that way when somebody did something for me. And I would think, okay, how can I become that grateful for the people that God uses to bless me? So eventually I learned more about this lady's history. My wife was on an evangelism team that went out to her house as a result of her first visit to the church. And during that visit, this lady shared with that evangelism team what her recent past was. Well, her husband had been a senior pastor. And he was playing basketball with his sons. I think maybe they were in their late 50s, it seems like, when this happened. He was playing basketball with his sons, who were in their 20s or maybe early 30s, and some other younger guys from the church. And while playing basketball, had a fatal heart attack and gone in the blink of an eye. And that's the call she got, that he's had a heart attack, he's gone, there was nothing they could do. Well, it was too painful for her to remain in their church where he had been pastor. And that's how she ended up in this church where we were in Mishawaka. Now, it would have been easy, it would be easy for me in a situation like that to, in my grief, just kind of ride the pews, regardless of what church I found myself in after a loss like that. But her insistence in this meeting was, put me to work, I don't care what I do, give me something. And, maybe part of that was to help take her mind off of her loss, her grief. But I remember in that meeting, they always gave all the church staff opportunity to ask any candidates for membership any question that you felt was relevant. And the associate pastor asked her, what can we as a church or a board do to minister to you? That was the first time I saw her cry. I did not know at that time about her losing her husband. And then it became my turn. We went around the room, and it was my turn to ask a question. And I couldn't. I just thought, okay, there's nothing I can ask this lady that won't reveal my spiritual immaturity. So I just passed, and I didn't ask her anything. I think there's a pretty good chance that everybody here in our prayer time, we ask the Lord for spiritual growth. I don't have to guess. I'm sure those of us that pray regularly, that's one of the things we ask. Lord, help me grow. Help me grow. I do in my prayer time. That's a pretty normal thing for me to say. Well, I was never quite sure how to achieve spiritual growth apart from Bible reading, church attendance, prayer, and maybe service to other people. But there is another way to grow spiritually. However, it might be a path that we most often prefer not to walk. When I was sick last Friday night, got sick after work with a stomach thing, and was up all night. That didn't pass till late Saturday morning. I prayed multiple times, God, take this away. This is just miserable. And in those prayers Saturday morning when I was kind of coming out of it, but still felt pretty lousy, while I was sitting on the couch praying, it occurred to me that, okay, what you have here is a pretty temporary thing. You're probably going to feel a lot better tonight. It's probably about a 24-hour deal. I looked over to my right. This was in our basement. That's where I go to do my devotions. And a prayer sheet like this was down there on the couch. I used that in the mornings before work. And I looked over at that prayer sheet, and it was turned to the side that says health needs. And I saw all these names. And just looking right now, I see cancer, 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 cancer. I didn't count, but that's a lot of people that have cancer, and this is not that long of a list. So one of these people is a coworker of mine, and he's going through stem cell treatment in Chicago. And I've never had cancer. I've never had a chemo treatment, but my understanding, some of you have had cancer and had chemo treatments. My understanding is chemo, it's poison, it's toxic. They're putting that in your body to kill the cancer, and it makes you really, really sick. A lot of nausea, a lot of vomiting. And so while I'm sitting there praying, Lord, take this bellyache away, and I looked over and saw this list, it occurred to me that, okay, these people are really sick. You're really not all that sick. So how about instead of praying for you, you start praying for them. So I started praying for the people on this list by name, and particularly the ones that have cancer. Now, that doesn't make me special that I prayed for other people while I was sick. And I'm sure a lot of you do that regularly. The only reason I mention that is I want to point out that there is a right way and a wrong way to respond to suffering. When we are suffering, we can focus completely on ourselves, or we can think about people who are suffering more than we are. And certainly there are people out there suffering more than we are. If you'll take your Bibles and turn to 2 Samuel chapter 12. We'll look at some responses to suffering. 2 Samuel chapter 12, and I want to read verses 14 through 23. And you know this is the story of Nathan coming to David and confronting him over having Bathsheba's husband put on the front lines when David should have been out there at war himself. And this David's sin has resulted in a baby. And we'll pick it up in verse 14. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. Now this child was born through a sinful act, but that doesn't mean David and Bathsheba didn't have a great love for this baby. Of course they did. And Nathan departed unto his house, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. David therefore besought God for the child, and David fasted, and went in, and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose, and went to him to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. And it came to pass on the seventh day that the child died. And the servants of David feared to tell him that the child was dead, for they said, Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spake unto him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. How will he then vex himself if we tell him that the child is dead? But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto his servants, Is the child dead? And they said, He is dead. Then David arose from the earth and washed, and anointed himself, and changed his apparel, came into the house of the Lord, and worshipped. Then he came to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he did eat. Then said his servants unto him, What thing is this that thou hast done? Thou didst fast and weep for the child while it was alive, but when the child was dead, thou didst rise and eat bread. And he said, While the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, Who could tell whether God will be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. So David worshiped and was able to eat after the loss of this baby. We have, I see one of them right now, 2 men in this church who have recently lost immediate family. And I have not noticed either of those men missing any church after that. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know, if I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I'm there yet. I don't know how I would respond to something like that. I've not had a loss like that. But what I've seen from these men is that they're soldiering on, doing what they've always done, setting a great example for me. I want to read an article from WNDU about the Wesco family. We're all familiar with what happened, I think it was October 30th, to one of the Wesco men in Cameroon. This article was on yesterday's edition of WNDU's website. And again, we're focusing on suffering and the responses of those who have suffered a great loss. A memorial service was held in South Bend Monday afternoon in honor of Charles Wesco, a local missionary who was killed while serving in Cameroon. Wesco was caught in the crossfire during a gunfight between armed separatists and soldiers on October 30th. I can't explain the peace that God has given me, said Wesco's wife, Stephanie. Even though my husband is gone, I will never walk alone. That's such a comfort to know that he will never leave me nor forsake me, and he will never leave my children. The kids keep talking about little things that my husband did with them that meant so much to them, she added. He was a visionary. He always had a plan for our family. It doesn't say it here, but I think they have 8 kids. Charles Wesco felt called by God to serve as a missionary in Cameroon with his family, who shared in his vision to serve. He loved working with children, so he had brought tons of different Bible memory booklets and harmonicas and a chalk easel set to do chalk talk pictures, said Stephanie. He would preach and our sons would draw. Though Wesco is gone, his love for the people of Cameroon lives on. For now, we're looking at moving back and relocating here, said Stephanie. My heart is still in Cameroon, so I'm still praying for God to work there in a mighty way, because part of us will always be there. As for their children, Stephanie says she plans to raise them how her husband would have wanted, teaching them to live by faith. I pray that God would send them back to Cameroon. Can you believe that? I pray that God would send them back to Cameroon, she said, that each of them would have their daddy's heart for the people there and for the people around the world. Stephanie says she thanks the community for their prayers and asks that people also pray for the country of Cameroon. Now, their response to this tragedy should speak to us as fellow believers, and it really should speak to even unbelievers who have seen this in the news. Here's what it should tell us as fellow believers. God is very big to them. God is very capable of carrying them through their grief. He should be just as big to us as he is to them. Her response, that family's response to this, should spur us to spiritual growth. It should tell any reasonable unbeliever that that kind of faith warrants a fair investigation. Perhaps in the course of searching for their own peace in the face of suffering, they'll come to Christ themselves. In this way, God can use great suffering for his great glory. Please turn to Job chapter 1. And we will read verses 18 through 22. I still hear some pages turning, so that's why I pause. Job 1:18. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Then Job arose, and rent his mantle, and shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground, and worshipped. And said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So, looking again at verse 21, Job said, The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. On the day that it was reported in the news that Charles Wesco was shot, our local media asked his brother Tim, who's a state representative, also a senior pastor, full-time pastor, I did not know that. They asked for a comment. And Tim said, The Lord gave, the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I don't know if I could say that if I lost a brother that way, and the media asked me for a comment. I'd like to be able to say that, and I'd like to think I'd be able to say that, but I've not experienced this kind of loss. I was so moved by Tim's response that I sent an email to his government email account, and I've not seen a response yet. That's okay. I don't know if I will or not, but that's a pretty profound thing to be able to say, and I wanted to let him know how struck I was by what he said. Exactly 3 years ago, this past Monday, 2 days ago, another article I want to read to you appeared in the South Bend Tribune. And you guys will be familiar with this that happened in 2015. The 28-year-old daughter of an Elkhart pastor was classified as brain dead Wednesday after being shot and critically wounded at her home on the northwestern side of Indianapolis, authorities said. Amanda Blackburn is the daughter of Phil Byers, pastor of First Baptist Church in Elkhart, the church confirmed. Her husband, Davey Blackburn, is pastor of Resonate Church in Indianapolis, according to the church's website. The Marion County Coroner's Office late Thursday afternoon said the cause of death was a gunshot wound to her head and ruled it a homicide. This was a home invasion. A young man went in there while another young man waited out in the car, and their agreement was he was just going to rob her. So when he came out and told the driver that he shot her, they had a confrontation. That was not supposed to be the plan. But I think she might have resisted whatever it was he was trying to do. Amanda Grace Blackburn has entered the presence of her Lord and Savior, First Baptist Church posted on its Facebook page. Please be in prayer for her family as they grieve this great loss. Members of the First Baptist family came to the church to pray for Reverend Byers and his family on Wednesday. The people wanted to support not only our pastor and his wife, but certainly Amanda's husband and little son. And that is really all we are doing here tonight, is just lifting up our petitions to God, our God, and to ask him to comfort them and give them peace, said the Reverend Jeff Zamont, the church's executive pastor. Extremely heavy hearts today, Resonate Church posted on its Facebook page, asking for prayer for the Blackburn and Byers families. News and social media reports indicated Amanda and Davey Blackburn had a 1-year-old son and that she was 12 weeks pregnant with the couple's second child. And one more article about Davey Blackburn, her husband, and Phil Byers, her father's response to what happened to their wife and daughter. After 2 men were arrested for the murder of pregnant Elkhart native Amanda Blackburn, her husband and father are relying on their faith to help them through the tragedy. Do you ever hear the news, either local or national, talking about faith or Christ or prayer? So already God is using a tragic thing for his glory. Even if nobody responds, people are hearing about God and faith and prayer and the response of the church family just by watching the news. In the midst of a tragedy, there is a natural reaction. You'd be a fool to think we're not feeling anger, admits Davey Blackburn, Amanda's husband. I want to be angry, adds Amanda's father, Phil Byers, who is a pastor at First Baptist Church in Elkhart. But Blackburn and Byers say they are praying that God will soften their hearts in the midst of the heartache. I'm praying for the peace. I'm praying for a heart of forgiveness. I'm praying for strength because I'm facing being a single dad, Blackburn explains. I'm trusting the Lord is going to strengthen us and take that away. I'm asking God to take that away, the anger. Take the anger, her dad, God, take the anger away. Anger is not my right response, Lord. Take that part away. I don't know if I could pray that. When asked if prosecutors should seek the death penalty against the two suspects, Blackburn said he hasn't given it much thought yet. Byers explained that final judgment isn't up to the court. It's not ours to take into our hands vengeance upon anyone who does evil towards our children, he says, but it hurts and it's painful. Amanda's husband and father say they can't imagine going through this tragedy without their faith. That's what the lost people in the community need to hear. We're living out the promise of God that he comforts those in their deepest times of need, Byers explains. The family will spend Thanksgiving together, remembering Amanda and her legacy. We're going to build fires in the fireplaces and drink lots of coffee and remember her laughter and remember her joy, Byers says. Amanda lived her life so people would come to know Jesus as their personal Savior, Blackburn explains. What a great way to end that article so that God is glorified to unsaved people. I have not experienced a loss, anything even remotely close to that. And for that, I'm thankful. The most painful time in my life was not a death at all. It was in the early stages of taking a new job in 2012. I left a job that I had been at for 15 years that I really loved. But I believed that God was moving me, so I obeyed. At first, everything was great. But within a few months, I started to feel like I had made a terrible mistake. My new coworkers had filthy mouths and perverted minds. They were not interested in the gospel. They were not interested in working. They were interested in gossiping. And if they couldn't find something true to say about you that was bad, they'd make something up and spread that around. It was during this time that my prayer life took on kind of a whole new meaning to me. I prayed more during that time than I'd ever prayed in my life. And it was during that time that God revealed the widow lady's secret to me. If you want to be godly, you might have to hurt. I've entitled this message, Hurting Helps. Because sometimes hurting can help us grow.
Amen.
It was like God said to me, be sure you really want to grow spiritually when you ask me to help you grow, because you might not always like the way I do it. He revealed to me that it is only through suffering that one of his children truly matures. Please understand that we can squander opportunities to grow that he has placed in our lives. We will waste them if we don't respond properly. While it is easy to question God or distance yourself from him in the midst of a trial, his desire for us is to do just the opposite. He wants us to draw near to him, lest we miss the lesson that he has for us. Let's not follow our flesh in feeling sorry for ourselves and asking why we have to suffer. Turn to Philippians chapter 3. And I'm going to read verses 9 through 11. Philippians 3, 9 through 11. Verse 9. And be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. He suffered. being made conformable unto his death, if by any means I might attain unto the resurrection of the dead. So in order to attain unto the resurrection of the dead, we have to die to self. Well, sometimes it's painful to die. I'm not talking literal physical death. I'm talking about mortifying the flesh, fighting the battle. Sometimes when God takes something away that shouldn't be there, that hurts. And I think that job that I had for 15 years that I really loved was maybe partially on God's throne, and there came a time when he said, this job needs to go because you've got it too high. And sometimes that hurts when God prunes. One of the areas of our suffering is intended to bring growth in is patience. And since Pastor Ruley's not here, I'm going to pick on him a little bit about his sickness and his lack of patience. Now, he told me when he texted yesterday that he was trying to be patient through this. And when he texted again today, he said almost verbatim the same thing, trying to be patient. I'm getting better, but this is not fast enough for me. He's probably going to see this on video. This might be the last time I get up here. I want to read verbatim the text that he sent me yesterday when he first asked me to be ready for tonight. Here's what he said, quote, "Healing is slow, James 1:4. Could you plan on preaching tomorrow night?" My response was this, "Happy to do it, still praying for you." His reply, "Thanks, I'm better, but not fast enough for me." Does that sound familiar? That's exactly what I said when I had my tummy ache. Oh, Lord, take this away now. Now, please understand, I love Pastor Ruley. I think he'd be okay with being used in that example. When I got home yesterday after receiving that text from him, I don't have James 1:4 memorized. My wife does. And before I reached for my Bible to look it up, I asked her to quote it. She started quoting it. Here's what James 1:4 says, "But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing." So patience is work. It says it right there. Patience is work. Now, with Christmas approaching, here is a shameless attempt by me to butter up my wife. I find it interesting that James used the female pronoun her when referring to patience. I say this because in general, the women I know are more patient than the men I know. In most situations, my wife is more patient than I am. Situations we deal with at home. I know we have a little dog that she's far more patient with than I am. Now, there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, I have found it to be true. My dad told me on the phone this week that he struggles with patience. He's 70, almost 70. I'm 47. So I thought, okay, well, I may very likely battle impatience as long as I wear human flesh. But if I ask, God will give me victory in those situations where my patience is tested. We have 2 teenage daughters. One of them tests our patience sometimes. The other one tests our patience all the time. Even tonight before we came down here. I won't say which is which because that would be gossip. Unfortunately, we often don't see suffering coming. Sometimes, a lot of times, we are completely blindsided by it. When I took that new job, I did not anticipate the suffering that I would go through. But I know for a fact that tomorrow I'm going to face a trial where I will suffer tremendously. I need a lot of prayer. Otherwise, I don't see how I can get through it. Please pray for me tomorrow around 2 o'clock because I'm going to get my teeth cleaned. And I hate going to the dentist. Now, I'm messing around, but seriously, when we suffer, we have options. We are used to comfort. From the moment we are born, even before we are born, Our mothers and the doctors do everything they can to make our development as smooth as possible. This is how we enter the world and spend our time here, trying to make ourselves as comfortable as we can. I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's human nature. It's what we've always been conditioned to do. But suffering will come our way from time to time. It's pretty much guaranteed. When it does, rather than looking for the fastest, easiest way out, we should get alone with God, thank Him that He cares enough for us to make us more like Himself, ask Him what needs to change, and ask Him to help us obey. We should remember those around us who are also suffering, lift them up in prayer. We have read God's directive to use our suffering for His glory. With His help and our cooperation, we can do that. That's all I got. Anybody have a testimony? I'm going to bring you the microphone.
In line with your talk tonight, we went to the Wesco Memorial Service. We had to leave early. I had a 3 o'clock appointment, but it's been going on for 2 hours, and I think they're about 3/4 of the way through their agenda. But I was reminded in this whole thing back when I was in high school, maybe even a little earlier, when the missionary Elliot was killed. And at that time, Wheaton College was a strong biblical force. And after that death, there were a number of missionaries or young men who felt like they were called to be missionaries who went out. And that death had kind of contributed to that. Early in the service, what was it, Monday, I guess, they listed, and I didn't count them, but I'll say 6 different people that got saved directly as a result of the testimony of the family and talking about the death of Charles Wesco. They had, I know one lady from the Cameroon. I think they had somebody from South America, and I think a couple of people from the United States that, in talking to people who knew the Wescos and the situation, wound up being led to the Lord. And then they made it very clear on 2 different occasions that Stephanie Wesco, the wife, let it be known that she forgave the one who shot her husband. And her hope is that the message will get to him that he too could come know the Lord.
Anybody else? We got time. Nope.
Hey Jason, I'm good. I just wanted to say, me and Brad have been going out so many years, probably been a month, maybe 2, since we started. It's helped me to, I don't know, kind of get out of my comfort zone, you know? It seems like we get so worried about
give us travel safety as we head home. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. We once again lift Pastor to you, asking for your blessings on him. Give him patience as he endures this sickness. Raise him up. Help him to be back here as quickly as possible. And Lord, when suffering comes our way, help us to use it. Help us to strive to glorify you and not ourselves. Help us to remember the Wescos, the kids, the wife, the Blackburns, the Byers. Lord, help us to pray for those people and the people in our own church who have recently lost loved ones. Comfort them, God, as only you can. We ask it in your name. Amen.